Hi there, class. This is Mr. Verzette. Today we're going to go over layering, the process of making things look real. So what is layering? Well, let's take a look at this picture right here in the middle. On the very, very bottom, we've got a value scale type look to it. Value scale or gradation is another word for it. It's a transition from one value to another. We've got black on the left, white on the right. And down on the bottom, let's imagine that this is the finished product of your work, your drawing. Well, how would you get to that step? Well, to layer, it's a little bit backwards compared to what we would think it would be. Believe it or not, you start with your lightest area first. And if you look at the slice right here above the arrow that says first step, you'll see that it corresponds to the light gray of the finished product. And not only that, it covers the entire surface of the finished product. Likewise, the second step matches up with the middle gray of the finished product, and it covers up a good half to 60% of the whole surface of the finished product. And finally, the third step, same thing. It's dark, and it keeps backing down a little bit. So you'll notice that each of these steps covers less surface. And this is kind of the process that you would go through to shade this kind of thing. You start with the lightest gray first, covering a large surface, and then you go to the next darkest value and cover a smaller, and so on and so forth. I'll demonstrate at the end of the screencast. So layering, why do we do it? Well, layering achieves value by shading over an area multiple times. That's how it's done. You actually go over the same area that you've worked on in multiple passes, and very strong work has an excess between 3 to 10 layers of work on it sometimes. You don't just hit the black first, you go in steps to get to the black. It's like you're building a foundation of a house. Layering involves basically shading light to dark. The reason why you do it, first of all, is because it gives you more control over what you do. It's a lot easier to add dark than it is to take away dark. And so naturally, if you start with your darkest values first, what happens if you make a mistake? You can use an eraser. You can't even get rid of all the lead if you use your eraser. It's a lot easier to add dark if you need to. The second reason why it's good to layer is because it fills in the gaps in between your strokes. Now remember, I'm not allowing you to smudge with your fingers with a paper towel. I'm not allowing you to smudge with a blending stick. I want you to prove to me that you can layer using individual pencil strokes. Only then are you allowed to use a blending stick in art design too. And the reason why is because once you have a grasp of layering, your blending with a smudging tool will be all the stronger. So layering allows you to go over your values and fill in those gaps between your strokes, and it smooths your values out. You almost don't even need to use a blending stick. Layering is the key to making realistic work. And finally, in this classroom setting, the way Mr. V teaches is that layering is just a general requirement for every assignment. We're going to be doing colored pencil work, pastel work, paint work. It all uses layering. And so it's best to start with the drawing phase. My professor always taught me a strong background in drawing makes for a strong talent in painting. So let's look at some examples. Here is a smudgy, ugly looking smudge here, but it's broken down into several passes. If you'll notice, the first pass covers the entire length of this smudge. The second pass covers the next darkest visible value. The third scales back a little less. The fourth scales back again. The fifth is finally the darkest value. Each subsequent pass gets darker. That's just because A, you're laying down more lead, and B, you're filling in the gaps between all those strokes, so there's less white showing through. Let's look at some non-examples. Shading that is not layered, basically you can see all the strokes. You can see the gaps. There's the white of the paper showing through. Now, it's cool, it's trendy. There's a place in art for art like this. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying as far as the objectives for the way I teach you, it's not going to line up right. So you want to do it the long way rather than the shortcut way. So let's look at a demonstration looking at a value scale. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the process of layering as if we were to layer in a value scale. Now once again, a value scale is just this rectangular structure here, and it just shows a whole bunch of different values between black and white. And as you can see, here's our shade, here's our midtone right in the middle, and here's our highlight right over here. So I just included the in-betweens here. So the in-between between black and gray, and likewise between gray and white. So rule of thumb, more of the in-betweens you've got, the more realistic it looks. And you'll have to do that. Even though we're only focusing on 3 values, you'll have to blend these values together. So this is how you layer. The very first thing that I'm tempted to do is to start with the black square right here, right? Because we read from left to right. Also, our eyes are drawn to the darkest part here. So it's actually the opposite in value shading. What you want to do is you want to start with your lightest value first, and you want to start with your lightest value covering everything up that's darker than it. Here's what I'm talking about. So let's first find our lightest value that we have to actually draw. We can't draw white because there's no lead there. So where pencil meets the paper, this is going to be the first value we work on. Okay? So if I were to layer, this is how I would do it. Watch the screen right down here. Bam! Just like that. I would start in my darkest area, and I would fill in all the gray up to where that value terminates, to where it ends. Kind of a weird concept, but once again, layering is going over something more than once in order to A, have more control over adding values, and B, to fill in the gaps between all those strokes. So naturally, if all of these values here in the back are darker than the first one we're going to start drawing, our lightest one, we want to treat this as one big rectangle so that all we have to do is then layer in more lead or paint or graphite or whatever you're using to increase the contrast, to increase the value, to get it darker. Okay? So you start over here in your darkest area first, and you go over here and you stop right where that value ends. That's how you do it. Okay, so we want to do our mid-tone here. We want to do this value. So how would we do it? Would we fill in the one square? Nope. We would treat all of this, these last 3 on the left, as if they're their own mid-tone. Okay? We're not touching this one because we've just laid it down in a sense right down here. So what we do is we start from where the darkest part's going to be, and we pull it out into the light. So here we go. Boom. And now we've got our 2 values here. To layer means to go over things more than once. The reason why we're doing this is to control how much dark we have. If we were to start with black, what would happen if at the end of the piece you realized, oh man, I needed more black, or I used too much black? Well, it's easier to add than to take away. That's why. So let's do this value here. How are we going to do this? Well, we're not going to do the individual square. We're going to treat everything that's darker than it as if it were its own block. Okay, we're going to ignore all of these, right? Bam! Just like so. All right, and so now it's time to do our black one here. All right, so where are we going to do it? Well, all we need to do, there's nothing darker than this. All we need to do is just fill in this area, black. Bam, and there we go. We've got our value scale. So if we were to imagine that, let me just give you an example of what this would look like topographically, meaning if we were to look at this from the edge of our paper and see how the lead is piled up, we would see a big mountain of lead, really exaggerated right here. And as we drop, the amount of lead would drop. And then we'd have the edge of our paper here. So in essence, the darker values have way more lead than the lighter values. So you'll notice that the most work, the most ground you're going to have to cover is going to be your lightest values. It takes the least amount of time to do your shadows. Think about it. If mid-tone takes 60% of your piece, then 60% of your drawing time is going to be involved with using mid-tone. So think about that. If you've got 10 days to work on a value drawing, then 6 of those days will be spent likely building up your base layers first. So that's one way how you can set goals. As always, if there are any questions in here, just go ahead and rewind that video and look at it. Things don't stick the first time. It's important to rewind, pause, look at the visuals if necessary. And that's just the nature of why digital can be superior to live demonstration. I'll be going over some demonstrations in class, and also there will be an additional demonstration screencast that you can watch for this as well. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you in class. Bye.